Hey, good morning. We are so glad that you're here today. We're excited to jump into a new series today. I got to give a quick update, though. Last week, we were supposed to have Brian and Lydia Drury with us. They're representatives of one of the mission partners that we support, Christian Mission of South India. And they were going to be here last week and give us a report on kind of the progress, some exciting things that are happening with the work there in India. But then the snow came. And so then we rescheduled for today, and they were going to be here today, and then you know what happened, right? Like we got more snow, and they're coming from just north of Indianapolis, so they got even more up there than we did down here, and so we were talking on Friday and just said, you know what, maybe it would be better just to put this off a little bit longer. We didn't want them to have any travel difficulties, so we don't have it rescheduled yet. Probably going to be sometime in mid-February or so. I'll let you know as soon as we know, but we're a little bummed out that they're not able to be with us today, but we're also glad that they were able to stay home and stay safe and warm. And all of that. So I already mentioned a little bit ago that we're going to be starting a new series today, and that's an exciting time for us. The beginning of a new year is always a great time to kind of start new things, and this year we're kicking it off with a series called Getting Right with God, because getting right with God is kind of a popular goal this time of year. It's a goal that a lot of people have. A lot of times we go into a new year saying, I'm going to make some improvements, or I'm going to make some adjustments in the coming year, and for a lot of people, a new or renewed spiritual focus in their life is one of the changes that they want to make this year. And maybe that's you, that's why you're here this morning, is you set a goal of like, okay, this year I'm going to give a little bit more focus to God. I'm going to begin to focus a little bit more on my spiritual life. And if that's you, man, we'd love to help you as a church. That's kind of right up our alley. As a church, our mission is to help people love, lead, and live like Jesus. And when we say that, this isn't just what we do as a church. Like, this is who we are at our core. We are people who love Jesus. We're people who want to be more like Jesus, and we want to help others know and love Jesus too. Also, though, not only are we starting this series right now, but we're also kind of right in the middle, not even in the middle, we're kind of coming close to the finish line of a long journey that we've been on as a church. Is that about a year ago, we started a journey through the book of Luke, and we've been going through it ever since then. The book of Luke is so important. It's so incredible. The Bible contains 4 different historical accounts of the life of Jesus, and what's amazing is that there's 4, but also that they were all written within about 30 or 60 years of Jesus's actual life, which is really unheard of for like people in ancient history. Anybody who was around 1,000 years ago or longer, it's really strange to have multiple biographies, multiple historical accounts of their life. And yet for Jesus, we have 4. And it's amazing that they're all written when they are. I mentioned they're all written within about 60 years of his life, because most other ancient figures that we know of, that we have an account of their life, they only have one, and it's usually written like several hundred years after they lived. And so there's always this question of, well, how accurate are these stories of their life? But yet we don't have those questions with Jesus, because they were written during a time when the people who were there and experienced it all were still alive and could say, this didn't happen, or no, it actually went this way. So it's actually really, really incredible. So anyways, we've been going through the Gospel of Luke. It's one of those 4 accounts. We started going through it last year about this time. Today is actually going to be our 35th week in the Gospel of Luke, because as we've been doing it, we've been taking it a little bit at a time. We'll do a few weeks, we'll do some of Luke, and then we'll take a break, and we'll talk about a different topic or a different book for a while, and then come back to Luke, and we've kind of been going back and forth. And so we are picking back up our study on the Gospel of Luke today, and we'll do this for we got 4 weeks in this series, and then we'll take another break, and then we've got a little sprint to Easter where we'll wrap up the Gospel of Luke there. And so we're excited about all that. So we're picking it back up, even though today is also kind of starting a new series in it. So where we're at right now is that in the book of Luke, a unique feature of it is this thing called the travel narrative. It is that in about chapter 9, about halfway through chapter 9 of the Gospel of Luke, Jesus began this journey, his final journey to Jerusalem. And so the events of what we're reading today, these would have happened, maybe just weeks before his death and his resurrection. This journey that he's taking to Jerusalem is going to be his last one. When he gets there, he's going to be arrested and beaten and executed, and then he's going to rise again from the grave. And so that's kind of the journey that he is on. As we've been going through this particular section of the Gospel of Luke, though, looking at this journey, what we see Jesus doing two basic things along the way is that he does a lot of teaching. He teaches some of his most important teachings occur during this time in his life, and then we see him meeting a lot of different people and kind of having encounters with them and changing their lives. And this series is going to be no different. In it, we're going to see Jesus teach on two specific topics, and we're going to see him have two encounters with people and see their lives changed, or maybe not changed in one case. And so the first 2 weeks of this series, one more last thing I got to tell you before we really jump into the text is this. This week and next week, we're going to kind of take them out of order a little bit. This wasn't the order we originally planned to take them in, but because of some of the scheduling difficulties we've had the last couple of weeks, this is kind of the way that it ended up. So you need to know that we're skipping over something that we're going to come back to next week. So today, we're going to be in Luke chapter 18. And as we go through this series, every single message is going to be an important message for anybody who is wanting to get right with God, with anybody who is wanting to follow Jesus in a meaningful way. This is information that you need to know that's going to lead to a significant perspective change, or maybe even life change, or at least it should. Kind of like when you're driving and a GPS updates and it sends you new directions, and all of a sudden you've got to make a turn to get to where you wanted. That's what we hope this series is. That if you're serious about following Jesus, then the information that we're going to examine through this series is going to lead, hopefully, not just to a changed life because of what Jesus has done for you, but hopefully it's going to lead you to making changes in your life as you seek to love and lead and live like him through the power of his Spirit leading in you. So, like I said, we're in Luke chapter 18. That's where we're going to pick it up. Right where we're picking it up is he's traveling. We already talked about that. He's traveling with his disciples, and he's going to share a parable with them. A parable the easiest way to describe it. It's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. It's a story that uses like imagery from everyday life to describe a spiritual reality. And so that's kind of the teaching method that Jesus is going to use. He's going to use one of those parables in today's text. And a lot of times when Jesus would teach in parables, he would teach them kind of open-ended. He would just tell the story and then not give a whole lot of explanation about what the actual story means. And he'd kind of leave it up to the listener or to the reader to figure that out. But this one's a little bit different. In this one, Luke, the author, when he's writing it down, he tells us the whole point of the story right up front. So we're going to look at it. Luke chapter 18, verse 1 says, "Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up." The whole point of what Jesus is about to teach them is that they would understand that they need to always pray and not give up. The Greek word that's used by Luke there, the Greek word that we translate as give up, it literally means to lose motivation in continuing a desirable pattern of conduct or activity. And that was a mouthful. So maybe an easier way to say it is, it means to lose enthusiasm, or to become discouraged. What Luke is talking about here, what Jesus is talking about here, is spiritual burnout. It's a kind of a weakening of your faith that comes over time, that comes maybe when you face difficult circumstances or when you are hoping for something to change and it hasn't been. It's this idea that there are things that we will come across in life that will weaken our faith or maybe even cause it to fail. And the fact that Jesus even needs to address this, the fact that Jesus thinks it's so important to talk about this, that tells us one thing right up front. It tells us that there are going to be times that come when this teaching that he's about to give is going to need to be remembered. Whether you're new to the faith or you've been following Jesus for a long time, or you're maybe just kind of picking up your faith again after some time away, a time is coming when you will want to give up. No matter who you are, no matter what you have, we are all going to face quitting points in life. And we face it in a lot of different areas. We face quitting points personally. You have times when you feel like you've given all that you can give, or maybe other times where you feel like you've taken all that you can take. And maybe in the words of Popeye, you get to a point where you say, you know what? That's all I can stands, and I can't stands no more. We have those personal quitting points, and we have relational ones too. Like maybe you've had a relationship with somebody that you care deeply about, and you reach that point of frustration with them where you just, you can't live with them and you can't live without them type of thing. Like there's some kind of barrier in that relationship has caused such frustration, and yet it's not changing yet, but yet you don't know what to do. Or maybe it's a moral quitting point where you're tempted to negotiate your values because doing right seems to cost so much and doing wrong seems to pay so well. Or maybe it's a spiritual quitting point where your faith begins to fail and you feel like giving up on God. All of us will get there eventually. But what do you do when you face that, when you face one of those quitting points? Jesus says right up front that we should pray always, that we should always pray and not give up, which tells us his point from the very beginning. The point that Jesus is making is this: persistent prayer revives failing faith. If there's anything that you remember today, it's this, that persistent prayer revives failing faith. If there's a lesson as you're trying to get your life back on track and trying to get right with God, if there's something you need to hear today, it's that at some point in your life, you are going to need to remember that persistent prayer revives failing faith. See, the power in prayer, as Jesus speaks about it there, it's in that word always. When you face these struggles, prayer is always the answer. And I get it. That sounds a little simplistic. It sounds a little trite. You're probably thinking, yes, I've gone through tough times and I've tried that. I've done the prayer thing. Or maybe you feel like, Jesus, he didn't come through. I know he says that we're supposed to pray all the time, but I've done that. And maybe you've had things you've been praying about for years that you don't feel like God has come through for you on. So you're like, yeah, I've tried that. So to say that prayer is always the answer, that seems a little simplistic. And yet Jesus knows that we're going to have those objections. He knows that that's the easy thing to go to, is like our own experience is like, well, this hasn't been the way things have seemed to go for me. Which is why he tells us the story that he does next. This is why he says the parable that he gives. Let's look at verse 2. He said, in a certain town, there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared what people thought. Which is interesting because that literally means that this man wasn't qualified to be a judge. Right? Like being in Jewish culture, having no fear of God violates Jewish religious law for a judge. Like they was said in the scriptures that they were supposed to fear God. Because how can you enforce judgments on people who break God's law that you don't even follow yourself? It also says that he doesn't care what people thought. Now, that doesn't sound entirely bad. I don't want a judge that's going to be easily swayed by what people think about him. But the connotation here isn't just that he doesn't care about what people think of his judgments. It's that he doesn't care about them at all. And in his role as a judge, that means that he doesn't care about protecting those people that the law is designed to protect. This judge is purely motivated by self-interest. And then Jesus introduces another character, verse 3. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, "Grant me justice from my adversary." A widow would have been understood as the most vulnerable person in society. The fact that this widow is seeking justice on her own, that she's seeking justice from a judge, it means that there is literally no one else in her life that can take up her cause. And the reason we know that is because women's testimony in that culture at that time, women's testimony was not allowed in court at that time. So for her to even have access to a judge meant that no one else was available. She had no husband, she had no son, she had no friend, she had no benefactor, she had no one who was able to come alongside her and to plead her case to the judge. And so she has to petition the judge continuously. And the only reason someone would do that, especially when they know that a judge is unjust, is because they don't have the money to pay the customary bribe in a situation like this. And so we know not only does she have no one in her life, no support, we also know that she's poor. We also know that she has an adversary. That's why she's coming to the judge. It is that there's some kind of problem going on. Most likely, she's being exploited by someone else for financial gain, and she's stuck living under the jurisdiction of this judge who doesn't care about God, doesn't care about her, doesn't care about anyone. She has nothing to offer this judge, and that judge knows it. And so he refuses to help her. He refuses for a very long time. And yet it says that she kept coming to him with the plea. Basically, she would not take no for an answer. She was persistent. She was always there. If he rendered a judgment and then was like walking out to his car afterwards, she's sitting there on the hood of his car saying, here I am. And constantly, she's the person that she calls the office, and he says, I don't want to take her call. And he gives the secretary a reason to just kind of pass her off, tell her I'm not available. But she keeps coming over and over and over, day after day. She walks him to his car when he leaves at night. She understands where she's just constantly pleading her case. She's always there, and yet he refused to meet with her. Look at verse 4. For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, even though I don't fear God or care what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice, so that she won't eventually come and attack me. Now, that's a pretty gross statement to make. Like he to himself said, I don't know if this was out loud or just an internal thing, but he said, even though I don't care about God or anyone else, I've got to get her off my back. That is a heartless statement. But even this heartless judge has his quitting point. Her persistence is beginning to cost him something. Her persistence in showing up and begging for justice is showing everyone in the community that he's not doing his job. It's going to sully his reputation. It's going to make any further advancement that he hopes to have in his life very unlikely. And so he's worried about that, but also, did you catch it in there? He's worried that she may eventually come and attack him. That word for attack, it literally means to strike someone under the eye. Like if in modern vernacular, we would say he was worried about her giving him a black eye. This is the same word used to describe what the Roman soldiers did to Jesus when they beat him. He's worried that she actually may make it physical because Granny don't play. And so he can't take anymore. And he resolves her case. What a despicable judge and person. Like we would expect Jesus to warn us to steer clear of people like that. But look at what Jesus says. Verse 6. And the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I've heard this parable taught a lot of times. And I've heard it oftentimes taught as if the reason that we're supposed to keep praying is that if we do, eventually we can wear God out. Like that we can, if we just keep coming and keep nagging, that eventually we can annoy God enough that he will give in and bring about whatever it is that we're asking for. That is not what this is teaching. Do you really think that you could wear down God? Like the God who created the universe and everything in it, that little old you is going to wear him down? You think you have that much power? You think you can take up enough of his time, that the one who created time, the one who says that 1,000 years is like a day and a day is like 1,000 years, you think you can wear him out of enough, waste enough of his time to get him to say, well, enough is enough? Worse, you think you can give God a black eye? If so, then what you're saying is that God is just like this unjust judge who we can all agree was despicable and horrible. And you're saying that God cares nothing for you. I don't think this is teaching us at all that we need to just, eventually wear God out with our prayers. Jesus is not like this unjust judge. That's exactly the point that Jesus is making. What he's doing is he's actually setting up a contrast. See, if the unjust judge eventually brought justice, the implied thing here is how much more will Jesus do for his followers? If even this unjust judge, who doesn't care about God or anybody, is able to eventually take care of this widow so that she'll leave him alone, how much more will God, who does care for you, how much more will he take care of you? Because he doesn't want you to leave him alone. Jesus said at the very beginning, this was so that they would always pray. Jesus says we should always pray even when we're at our quitting point, and there's 3 reasons for it. As we go through these next couple of verses, I think we're going to see 3 reasons why we should pray all of the time, why we can feel confident always praying through those difficult circumstances. And the first one is just very simply that Jesus is a just judge. See, for so many of us, our spiritual quitting point it's right there with that idea that Jesus is a just judge. Because we feel like if God doesn't act in the way that we want him to, then it must be because he's not good or he's not just. And I get it. Like anyone who feels that way would eventually quit coming to him if we feel that he's being unjust. Why would you continue to go to him? The widow kept going to the unjust judge because she didn't have any other options. He was the judge that she lived under. Yet in the same way, sometimes we fail to understand that Jesus is our judge, that his jurisdiction is all of creation. But he's not a judge in the same way that unjust was, and that the unjust judge was a judge. Jesus is a just judge. He doesn't need you to wear him out in order to act on your behalf, because he judges by righteous standards. The unjust judge judged only based on what was good for him and what he wanted. But Jesus uses righteous standards. See, it's easy for us to look around in the world and to wonder if God is just. We can look around and we can see so much injustice in the world. Just yesterday, I saw a news report about the fires in California and how people were going and looting the homes of the people who had had their things destroyed or partially burned or were in the path of the fire. We saw the same thing happen in our own community a little over a year ago when the tornado came through. So we had news reports that a lot of those homes that got damaged, there were people coming and looting and taking advantage of people who are in incredibly difficult circumstances. And it's not just like looting that I'm talking about. We can look all over and we see stories of children being abused, and we hear about sex trafficking that happens around the world, and we hear things about elder abuse, and we hear about impropriety by our leaders, and it makes us just like, it makes you want to pull your hair out. It makes you want to just go crazy because we know this is not the way it's supposed to be. And we know that is just a deep, deep evil when people go to those ends. And do you ever wonder that if God is just when you look at the news? And if you do, if you look at our world and you say, you know what, I don't know if God can be a good God because of what I see around me, let me encourage you to look at the cross. Because the sacrificial and the substitutionary death of Jesus on the cross is a miracle of divine justice. Basically, to sum it up very quickly, God demonstrated his unconditional love without violating his holy character. Say it another way. On the cross, God treated Jesus as if he had committed all of your sins, so that by faith he could treat you as if you had performed all the righteousness of Jesus. Jesus is a just judge. He demonstrated that justice to you and for you on the cross. And so you can trust that he still is just, even when you look around at circumstances in our world that make you want to shout that he is not good. We should always pray because we know that Jesus is a just judge. Look at the cross. But if Jesus is a just judge, then we also know that every cry for justice will be answered. If Jesus is a just judge, every cry for justice will be answered. Jesus says as much in the next verse, verse 8. He says, I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. So when we cry out to God for justice, when we cry out to God to make things right, when we come to him with our longing for things to be set right again, for evil to be repaid, Jesus says here that he will see that it happens quickly. And that word's another struggle for us. Because we don't see things getting fixed quickly. In fact, oftentimes it seems like things are just getting worse. If Jesus is a just judge and he's going to answer every cry for justice quickly, then clearly one of those statements is wrong. Or he just doesn't work according to my schedule. See, sometimes we need to trust God even in moments when we don't understand. I heard somebody say one time that just because I don't understand electricity doesn't mean I have to keep sitting in the dark until I do. We can trust that God is just, and we can trust that he will answer every cry for justice. Even if it hasn't happened yet, we can trust that it will. But I think there's a little bit more light that we can shed on that. We think that word quickly means like in a short amount of time. And the Greek word that's used there, it literally means that, but it can also mean a relatively short amount of time in comparison to some other thing that is still to come. See, when we view quickly as being a relatively short amount of time, when it's viewed as being short in comparison with something else, then we can understand what Jesus means when he says quickly, is that from God's perspective, it is quickly. When you have eternity, however long you have to wait can be viewed as a quick thing. 1,000 years is as a day, and a day is as 1,000 years. It isn't quickly in comparison to my life, but yet my life and your life is a vapor that appears for a little bit and then is gone. See, our perspective of what is a long time is not God's perspective. And when you think about that same idea, what does that say about our prayers? See, we get worn out when we ask God over and over and over and don't feel like we're going to see justice. But this widow was persistent in her request. Are you? It feels like we are, but I'm going to push on you here for a second. You may think that you are a prayer warrior, but how often do you lose that battle? Isn't it interesting what a fight it is for us to pray sometimes? We can go and talk to someone for hours about what we're going through. We can tell them all the details. We can share our frustrations, our hurt, our pain. We can cry with them. We can talk about the ways that we've been hurt, the destruction that's going to go on in other people's lives if this thing doesn't get fixed. We can talk about all of that, and we'll go on and on and on for hours and then find it hard to spend a few minutes in prayer over it. We doubt that every cry for justice will be answered. But then we turn around and we fail to raise the cry for justice to God in the first place. And, oh, but God sees me. Like God sees my whole life. He sees everything that goes on in my life. He knows what I need. What if the gift of persistent prayer isn't only the justice that it brings, but the relationship with Jesus that it fosters? You pour out your troubles to other people because they will listen, but yet we don't treat Jesus as if he will do the same. The payoff of persistent prayer is Jesus. And he can do so much more than listen. He can actually bring justice because he is just. But let's go back to that tension a little bit, though. If Jesus is just, and every cry for justice will be answered, but yet we see injustice happening in the world, in our own lives, or in the world around us, and we may even see people who have prayed their own prayers for justice and then passed away before they ever received that justice, then there must be a missing component in that equation, right? And this is what it is. Not every cry for justice will be answered in this life. Not every cry for justice will be answered in this life. See, Jesus said that God would answer all calls for justice quickly, but we already talked about how that was relative to something else. Quickly relative to this other thing that is going to happen. And what is that thing? Look at the second half of verse 8. Jesus said, I tell you, he will see that they get justice and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? See, that thing that the quickly is in comparison to is Jesus' return. Which is important here to notice that Jesus says when the Son of Man returns, which means he will return. We'll talk more about that next week. See, we want to know when that is. We want to know when he's coming to set everything right. But Jesus is much more concerned with how will you respond when he does. Will he find faith? The Greek word there literally says the faith. Will he find the faith on the earth? Meaning the type of faith that the persistent widow has demonstrated. Did you notice that when Jesus talks about his return, he wonders if he's going to find people who will exercise this persistent prayer, this continual crying out for Jesus. This continual crying out for justice is still ongoing when the Son of Man returns. But think about this. If they're still crying out, if we're still crying out for justice when Jesus returns, that means that he has not answered our cry before his return. See, we should expect in life that there will be some things, not everything, I don't know how much, but there will be some things that will not be fixed before he comes. Which leads us to a difficult question, and I'm just going to let this hang there for a second. Will you trust that God is just if he doesn't answer your prayer in this life? Are you prepared to trust that God is just even if he doesn't answer your prayer in this life? If that diagnosis doesn't go away, if that relationship doesn't get fixed, if your financial situation doesn't change, if things actually get worse than they are now, will you be able to have a faith that still trusts that Jesus is just? Will you be able to look beyond your circumstances and look at the cross and what he has already done, to trust the promise of what he said he will do? If you're going to do it, it's going to be through persistent prayer. Prayer that demonstrates that you understand that Jesus is just and that he will answer every cry for things to be made right, because persistent prayer revives failing faith. We're going to close with a song. We're going to sing a song, and I believe the song is called All I Am. And it starts out with a question. It just says, why should I worry what tomorrow brings and put my faith in temporary things? And then a little bit later, when we get to the chorus, we're going to sing these words, that if all I have is Jesus, I have all I need. If all I have is Jesus, I have everything. Persistent prayer revives failing faith. The payoff of persistent prayer is Jesus, who is just and who will answer every cry for justice, although it may not happen in this lifetime. So as we close and as we sing this song, if today is the day where you need to take that step, to trust him to be that just judge that he has said that he is, that he has demonstrated that he is for you on the cross, and that he promises to continue to be throughout all eternity, and you're ready to place your faith in him, I'd love to talk with you about what that means, about what that next step could be. For some of you, that would mean, taking a step of baptism and saying, okay, God, I'm going to obey you in this way. For others of you, it maybe means a recommittal, that you stepped away from faith for a while, but now you're going to come back and to give it a kind of a renewed focus in your life. I'd love to talk with you about what that could mean. So as we finish, I'll be standing in the back. I'd love to talk with you. If you feel like, an in-person conversation, I'm not quite ready for that, you can fill out one of those Connect cards. I'd love to call you sometime this week, and we can talk on the phone. We can set up a time where we can meet somewhere else. I'd love to be able to do that, but don't let today go by. Don't let another day go by without trusting Jesus to be who he says he is, who he has demonstrated himself to be, and who he has promised to be throughout eternity. Let's pray together. Father, we love you. We thank you for Jesus. We thank you for the peace that we have in you, knowing that you are just and you are good and that you will make everything right. And so now, God, as we live in that time in the in-between where we can see some of the great things that you are doing in the world, but we can also still see the evil that is everywhere and that continues to seem to thrive. God, would you help us live in that tension of what we know you've already accomplished, but also looking forward to the hope of what we know you will ultimately accomplish. And help us to trust. Help us to pursue you passionately through our prayers, to trust who you are. We love you. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.